Hi, everybody. I am Chris Joseph. We're here on Talking Threadheads. I'm with my podcasting partner, Nicole Snyder. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Chris.
That always sounds so forced.
I love it. I know.
And so this is season 3.
hmm
It could be episode 2 or it could be episode 3, right? Depending on when we release this.
It's whatever you choose it to be.
I like that. That gives me some control. So we have today with us, we're really happy to have Cilista. I'm going to pronounce your last name correctly. Eberle, I got it right?
Yes, you did.
Good. And Michael Murphy of Michael Murphy Productions. We have a lot to talk about, so let's just jump right in. Tell our listeners about your background, how you got started doing film projects in New Orleans, and about your association with New Orleans musicians.
Okay. And by the way, thanks to both y'all for having us on this show. Yeah, I've heard wonderful things about what y'all do, so this is nice. I started working with the Jazz and Heritage Festival, the foundation folks, back in the mid-'80s. I was doing radio work. I was a field producer for WGBH out of Boston and a bunch of other radio stations. And I was struggling, to make a living. And I had a son that I was trying to support, and I was just trying to figure life out. I love music. New Orleans is my hometown. And so after doing that for about 3 years, in 1989, I approached Quint Davis and I said I would love to start trying to produce television programs here with the festival. And, he sort of asked me a bunch of questions. And at the time, I didn't have any experience producing television shows, but I did have a degree in communications with a major in broadcast production from Loyola University. So he trusted me. And the first year I shot, he let me shoot at the jazz stage, the jazz tent. So that same year I was doing radio work, and I took what they paid me from the radio work and I just self-funded a shoot for television. That was the intended use of it. And I believe it was Danny Barker and Lulu's last performance together too. There was some really cool stuff that we shot.
Wow.
And that allowed me to get a meeting with NHK. They had an office in New York. NHK is like the PBS equivalent. It's in Japan. It's the largest broadcaster in Japan. And I was able to get an invitation for a meeting, and I just brought a box of tapes and I said, "This is the Jazz Fest." And they said, "Well, we need you to edit these tapes." And I didn't have any money for editing. So they said, we'll arrange for an editor here in New York. We'll pay for the editor, but you need to sit there and you need to sit there with the editor. And he's bilingual, and tell him how to cut a show reel that you feel reflects your work as a filmmaker and reflects the Jazz and Heritage Festival. And so I was a nervous wreck. We worked till about 3 or 4 in the morning. We started at about, I think, 10 at night. We worked about 4 in the morning. I went back to my hotel, took a shower, had breakfast, had a meeting the next morning with NHK. And it worked out. It worked out. It was one of those things where I think my presentation convinced him as much as the show reel, because the show reel wasn't very strong. It was okay.
Let me ask you, had anyone been shooting Jazz Fest before you?
What I remember was that I think 2 or 3 years before that, Ken Ehrlich had shot something.
He did.
And then Ken hadn't gone back. So I followed Ken, and next thing I knew was starting in 1990, we were doing major productions. I mean, a lot of trucks, a lot of crew, multiple stages. And it was back during the day of Jazz Fest where they had all the performances during the day at the fairgrounds, and they had all these night performances at the auditorium, on the riverboat. So we were working easy 18 hours a day on those shoots. And we filmed Jazz Fest for 25, 27 years.
Wow. And so, Cilista, how did you become involved in shooting the fest?
I moved temporarily to New Orleans in 1991. I was going through a divorce, and my now ex used to lord it over me that I had never been to New Orleans. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go down there. I'll go for Mardi Gras, I'll go for Jazz Fest, and then I will figure out what to do with my life and move on. And so I came down wanting to write, not wanting to work, but I had taken a part-time job with a recording engineer named Keith Keller. And Keith was a friend of Michael's. So he said, you two need to meet each other. And Michael's like, I don't want to hire anybody. I'm like, I don't want to work. And we had a great meeting, decided that on a temporary basis that he would hire me. And that was January of 1992. Our first job actually was not Jazz Fest. It was one of the early high def shoots in the country where NHK brought in a huge van. They still call them Obi vans. And we shot Mardi Gras on Bourbon Street. So I had been here for 2 months, and that was my first shooting, my first experience in video. I'd been working in film in New York. I knew nothing about video. And it was Mardi Gras, and we were working with these enormous cameras on Bourbon Street on Mardi Gras. So it was quite the initiation.
And I gotta say, and I know she hears me tell this story all the time, but up until about 5 minutes before the meeting ended, where I was taking the meeting because she was introduced by a good friend of mine, and I was like, I'm not going to hire this woman. I mean, come on. But I was trying to be nice. At the very end of the meeting, and I know now why she said it, she'll tell you, but she said, okay, well, look, do you like to go fishing? And I said, do I like to go fishing? Yeah, I like to go fishing. And she said, well, do you have a fishing rod and reel that I can borrow? I'm going to go fishing with a friend of mine in Grand Isle. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll lend you a fishing rod and reel, sure. So then she left. And then I go, I'm going to hire her because she likes to go fishing. And
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And the reason I asked the question was that I had been talking to people, and they said, well, there's one way to know whether or not someone from New Orleans is a good person or not. I said, okay, what's that? I said, it's easy. Ask them if they like to fish. If they like to fish, they're a good person. So that was
yeah. So that was what, 31, 32 years ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's been a hell of a career.
Have you shot every Jazz Fest since then?
Not every Jazz Fest. So Michael Murphy Productions filmed it, probably 25, 27 years. Then we can get into what happened later, but there was a film that Cilista and I made together, Make It Funky. We licensed it to Sony Pictures, and the release date for the film happened to fall exactly when Hurricane Katrina was hitting. Mm-hmm. So Sony Pictures had to pull the film because of what happened in New Orleans. We used the film as a fundraiser for the city of New Orleans. And we were told, and we said, fine, you can just give it away. And we lost a ton of money, but just give it away. But everybody that airs it has to raise money for the city of New Orleans. They donate to a relief organization of their choice. One of the companies that I called was Microsoft. I had a friend there, and I said, I'll just give it to you if you just stream it worldwide. the film went on, we were told it raised about $10 million that was spread through all these different organizations. That led to Microsoft. They loved the film and called me out of the blue to said, would you move to Seattle? We'd like you to run video production and be in charge of a team of people for MSN. Because we had lost a ton of money at the film, I took the job. And then while I was there, Quint Davis was hiring Cilista for like another 3 or 4 years to be sort of his field producer when other companies came on board. And then there was I think 2008 was the last year that we did it, even though I was with
2009.
Yeah, I was still with Microsoft, but I had built into my agreement that I could go back and film Jazz Fest. And then, you know, we've stayed good friends with the festival and with Quint and the foundation.
When Live Nation came in and infused cash into Jazz Fest Festival, they basically wanted their own people to come in and
It was
shoot.
AEG, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, not Live, AEG, right.
AEG, sorry. And so that was a good relationship because we were friends with the people in AEG, and so it was a sad transition, but it was okay.
So one more question about all the footage you shot. A lot of that is in the Jazz Fest archives, right?
Yeah, what happened, how that worked out was I had done a fair amount of research on the importance of archiving material instead of losing it, and mainly for historical purposes, for educational purposes, because I got started early in the business. Before I shot Jazz Fest, I was making a documentary about a photographer, and I was writing grants for that, and I would meet pretty regularly with the National Endowment for the Humanities in Washington, D.C. I was writing grants to the LEH. I was getting grants, and all that research, I kept on seeing the importance of archives. So I started at a very really beginning, as soon as I was doing the NHK stuff, every master tape that we shot, the line cuts, the audio tapes, camera tapes, interviews, I started putting them in a vault in Los Angeles. And over the years, the vault grew. We needed 2 vaults. It represented about 6,000 hours of interviews and performances. And the Jazz Fest Foundation for years had been asking me about it. I started getting approached by organizations and companies from the United Kingdom and from Germany that heard about the archive and wanted to buy it. I got approached by a company in New York, but I really wanted it to stay in New Orleans. So we sold it to the Jazz Fest Foundation at a steeply discounted price. It was heavily discounted because we wanted it to stay in New Orleans, and they also, part of the deal was that Cilista and I can use the archive for any projects we want to. We don't have to pay a licensing fee. And right now we've been working really hard to help bring awareness and raise funds to get that archive digitized. It's really important it gets digitized.
Yeah, we had Rachel Lyons on the show a few weeks ago, and she explained a lot of this, but it's nice to see the connection between you guys and what she's doing.
Yeah, she does a wonderful job. Although the Michael Murphy collection, it's called, is she says their most important collection, or this centerpiece, there's a lot of other great stuff that she has in there. Photographs,
Right.
stuff in WOZ. She's done a terrific job building that archive and maintaining it.
Can you help our listeners understand what the obstacles are to getting the collection digitized?
Cost.
Right.
You know, that's the main thing. I mean, it's I'm not sure people totally understand what happens to audio tapes and videotapes over a long period of time. So I knew enough early on that I started renting climate controlled environments. So the vaults were regular film vaults that are used by major film production companies. So the tapes represent the evolution of basically videotape. I mean, it goes from beta to beta SP to digibeta to high definition, you name it. Now we're shooting in 4K.
And on drives.
And on drives, but everything, but physical tapes, the tape material can deteriorate. And luckily, because we made the decision to keep things in a film vault, and they're still in Los Angeles, when we go to use them now for different projects, the quality is still really high. But there's a shelf life, the best way to put it. And to get it digitized is extremely important. I can't stress that enough. I mean, you know, I just had a phone call. Cilista and I had a phone call with a very good friend who's a television producer in Berlin. And we just got finished helping him with another project. And so I pitched him. I said, look, and he understood. I said, I need help. I'm trying to help the foundation. I think the foundation is starting to recognize it now. From what I understand, they're going to allocate money to help defray some of the costs. And I think it would have happened sooner if COVID hadn't canceled the Jazz Fest for a number of years, because that's where their main source of financing comes from. So we're working very hard on that, and we're starting to chip away, make some progress.
It's really useful information to share with people because I think folks aren't aware, as you said, of the complexity and reality of having physical materials, right, that degrade over time. So I think it's really helpful to share that information with folks. I mean, people can interact with the material through the films that you make, right? You spoke a little bit about Make It Funky in 2005, but you have a few other films that you've made that are sourced from not just the Jazz Fest material, but other material as well. Can you speak about Up From the Streets?
Sure. So, well, I'll back up and I'll give sort of the way I was thinking back when we did Make It Funky. So I started as I was getting older, and the Jazz Fest work led to, I got approached by Isaac Tigret, and Isaac Tigret had started the Hard Rock Cafe, and he flew me over to London, basically, and he said, I'd like to talk to you about a new project I'm trying to do with Dan Aykroyd, and it's called House of Blues. And he basically, the classic, writing it down on a piece of paper, this is my vision for this. And he said, I need somebody who knows television production and who knows radio production. And I've heard really good things about your work. Would you be interested? It ended up that Cilista and I became part of the founding team of the House of Blues chain. I was president of production. Cilista was vice president. I oversaw our television, radio production, produced and created the House of Blues television series. And all of those shows, the House of Blues show, the Jazz Fest shows, were heavily performance-based programming. Even though they had interviews and stuff, I started really wanting to tell the story of my hometown of New Orleans. I wanted more of the history. I wanted more of the culture. I started sitting down with a lot of musicians, and primarily the Black musicians, the African-American musicians, because that is the core of New Orleans music. And they started opening up and telling me about the struggles during Jim Crow, the struggles during civil rights, and how music was really one of the only vehicles to allow them to not escape it, but be able to carve out a living. Make It Funky was the first one that Cilista and I worked on, and we had Art Neville, who was the host. It was fantastic. And that was a combination of history and performance, because we staged a major concert and brought in Earl Palmer and Lloyd Price and all of these greats. Up from the streets, I had left Microsoft, and I turned to Cilista and I said, you know, let's do another film. And we targeted the 300th anniversary of the city of New Orleans. And we said, let's tell the story of 300 years of the history of the city through the lens of music. And the way these things got, you know, they work out, it's very hard to raise money for these projects. So we self-funded, I think we shot 5 or 6 different interviews to form the basis for a show reel, a pitch reel.
Which we did in 2015
Yeah.
to raise the money.
To raise money. I approached a very dear friend that I had known for 30 years. He was based in London. He helped me get the funding. We wound up, Universal Music was our partner, and Eagle Rock, which is now, I forgot what Mercury Studios. And during the editing process of the show reel, Terrence Blanchard jumped out at us as somebody who was really good on camera. And he represented the culture that we wanted to propel the story. And we had filmed Terrence a number of times at Jazz Fest. And he immediately came on board. He said, sure, let's do this. We're proud to say it's a very, very good film, and it's won a lot of awards and it's been recognized. It's like most things, like you guys, I'm sure, it was another labor of love. And it just happened to work out.
One of the interesting things that we've sort of been talking about we've sort of are starting to help younger filmmakers, talking with them about how to put together a documentary and film. And so we got into talking about how you start the film. I said, especially with a documentary, how you think you're going to start the film is not necessarily how you end up doing it. With Make It Funky, it was very simple. The genesis of that film came, Michael and I had gone to Donna's Bar and Grill on Rampart Street.
That's right.
And it was a Sunday afternoon, and nobody was in yet. They have they don't exist anymore. They had brass bands that came in the evening and played, but you could get a beer and red beans and rice. And we were sitting there, and this older gentleman came in holding the hand of probably 4 or 5-year-old.
5-year-old, yeah.
And brought him in, sat him on the piano stool, put a quarter in the jukebox and hit a button, pulled a mouthpiece out of his pocket and gave it to a little boy.
A mouthpiece of a horn.
Oh, sorry, yeah, of a trumpet, and said, now listen to the music and play. And they did. And he was helping the little boy by playing notes on the piano and talking to him. And he turned to me and he said, that's the genesis of our film.
Yeah.
Right there.
A light bulb went off because the grandfather was playing Louis Armstrong on the jukebox. And he was making his grandson listen to the notes and then how to play it on the piano. And as Cilista said, I was having a beer and I turned around and I said, wow. So we recreated that whole scene for the opening of Make It Funky.
Now, Up From the Streets was slightly different, where I think we had 3 or 4 different openings, because when you're trying to do 300 years of New Orleans, the tagline, a look at New Orleans culture through the lens of music. How do you do that? And we originally started out with a black ceremony for slaves, a memorial that was happening up the river, and then we tried a few other things. And finally we came down to New Orleans. What makes it important in the beginning was it was at the mouth of the Mississippi. All the boats came up, things came down, slaves came in, trade went out, etc. So he goes, okay, let's take Terrence down to the river and have him play. And that's the opening scene of Up from the Streets, is an homage to the Mississippi River, because it is where everything sort of began. So you never know with each project.
Yeah, and that one's been interesting because that has been really well received. We did a radio interview, and critically, Make It Funky was really well received. Critically, Up from the Streets was well received. Make It Funky came out just when COVID and when Katrina hit, and Sony had to pull it for about 8 months or a year. Up on the Streets was just coming out. It had been in a number of film festivals and had been nominated for Best Feature-Length Documentary on all these different film festivals. And just when it was gaining momentum and the world shut down because COVID hit. And performances stopped. The film festivals actually stopped. They stopped doing film festivals. They were doing virtual film festivals. And we wind up getting, I don't know, it must have been 50 or 60 different film festivals that wanted to have Up on the Streets in a virtual screening. But I was doing a radio interview for what's the
Canadian?
No, the one in New York with Alan.
Alan Light. I don't know. It's a big
one of those big radio groups. Anyway, they knew my work and they said, Michael, look, all we can say is that Katrina hit, COVID hit. Can you please stop making documentaries, because the world can't take any more disasters. And it was a funny comment. It was a funny comment.
It's a really funny comment. Well, I'm curious about the genesis of Irma, My Life in Music, but I'm also a little afraid of what might happen next.
Luckily, it's been released and nothing bad happened. So I think the curse is broken. Yes.
Yeah, Irma was one of those that came out of the blue. We had wrapped up from the Streets. There was something else, some other project we were just finishing. I forgot what it was. We were doing all the paperwork and the accounting and all that kind of stuff. And Cilista said, let's take a break. Let's just take a break. You know, we had just moved to Bainbridge Island. We hadn't really moved into the house. And
We hadn't unpacked.
we hadn't unpacked. He said, let's just take 6 months off and just, you know, let's go fishing. And out of the blue, WIS called and said, hey, we'd like to do a documentary on Irma Thomas. You guys have worked with Irma for almost 30 years. We'd like you to come on board. Could you do it for us? And because we were good friends with Irma, and we've known Irma for a long time and worked with her, and she's a wonderful, wonderful woman, I turned to Cilista and I said, you know, let's do it, okay? And she said, yeah. She said, but promise me we'll get this one and we're gonna take a little break. I said, okay. So we went back to New Orleans, and the timeline was very tight. I think we had 7 months to make the film, where Up on the Streets took us like 3 years, Make It Funky took 3 years. Luckily, we had a tremendous amount in the archive. So we immediately contacted Rachel at the Jazz Fest Archive, Foundation Archive. She said, yeah, you know, let's do this. So it was a co-production of YES, our company, Michael Murphy Productions, and the festival. And it's turned out really well, and people have responded really well. Irma's career has like gone up again, and she and I have talked, and she says, my God, she said, I never anticipated that film would have done so much so quickly. And you know, and she deserves it. She's a treasure for the city. and such a warm, loving, good person.
I will say one thing, we did have one disaster. We got to the point where we had finished the rough cut,
that's
it was
right.
locked.
That's
All we had to do was go in online at color correction, and Hurricane Ida hit, and power was lost. So we had another 2.5, 3 weeks. We couldn't do anything because YES was down. We had no power. So there was that.
Right, Ida did hit.
But we got it done by September. That was our original deadline, and we made the original deadline, but it was a hot end of production, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and you know, the whole career has just been, I think, a matter of luck and timing and perseverance and resilience. Basically, the story of New Orleans, I think. But we're now moving on to some other projects, and out of the blue, we were contacted about 3 weeks ago. There's a very well-known, it's the 30th anniversary of this film music festival in Berlin. And they had wanted to, 3 years ago, they were planning to do their whole 2-week or 3-week festival was to focus on the Mississippi River and how all of the music came up from New Orleans and influenced all of this music all over the world. And New Orleans was the focus, but they were also going to have music, you know, Zydeco and Cajun and whatever the case is. But basically, it was like New Orleans and the river were the roots of this musical tree. They contacted us and said, "We'd love to see some of your films. We've heard a lot about Up From the Streets and the Irma project." So we sent them links, and they're going to put the big spotlight again on Up From the Streets. It's going to be one of the films that they're focusing on, I think, to sort of open up the festival. That happens this in July. And then, you know, and we're proud of it because we didn't shy away from the racial issues that the musicians struggled with, going back to Mahalia Jackson, to Louis Armstrong. So many of the New Orleans greats struggled with it. And we asked Terrence to talk about it. Initially, the distributor did not understand why we wanted to build that into the story of the music of the city, but you can't get away from it. You can't tell that story unless you include that. And that's been an element that Cilista and I have gotten phone calls about. We've gotten emails. At screenings, people come up and hug us. African-American audience members have come up and says, "Thank you so much for telling this story." And it feels good. It really feels good and timely.
So we've talked about the 3 movies, Make It Funky, Up From the Streets, and Irma, My Life in Music. Where can listeners see these movies? Are they on streaming, video on demand, purchase?
The Up From the Streets is now, it's been picked up by Apple TV and Amazon. So it's there. Make It Funky was distributed for, Sony Pictures had it for 15 years. So that 15-year licensing, I think, just ended last year. It was distributed all over the world. It did really well.
You can still find it on DVD on Amazon if you still have a DVD player.
Yeah, we're looking at, we're considering raising money again to help do some extra clearances in that. We cleared everything for 15 years. All the musicians are fine. I've got to look at the music licenses. And then if the music licenses need some extra clearances, we're going to go back to Rachel Lyons and say, you know, let's do this. I do know that Don Marshall wanted to have a screening of Make It Funky in the city of New Orleans. I want to use it as a fundraiser for the archive. That was something that I talked to Don about.
Excuse me.
And what about the Irma movie? Where can we find that?
The Irma movie and this is, Cilista went to get a power cord because the battery in the Mac is getting low. Because of funding restrictions, um, I want to position it correctly, because raising money in the city of New Orleans is so hard for everybody, because everybody needs to go to the same companies. It's just a handful of companies. WIS struggled to raise money for the film, and the film wasn't going to happen. We were 40% into production, and a decision needed to be made. Could we continue the film, or do we have to stop it? So I contacted a very, very wonderful, dear couple who were based in Los Angeles, who loved Up on the Streets. And I didn't even know these people. They came to Jazz Fest, introduced themselves to me when I was doing a signing for the box set of CDs that Cilista and I were actually producers on that. Anyway, I met them, and we were having shortfall. So they said, "How much do you need?" And we told them, and they gave us the money without anything. They did just no paperwork. So I contacted them and I said, "Look, I am so embarrassed to have to do this. If you want to help, we could really use the help." And I just said, "This is the project. It's Irma Thomas." It was amazing. They just said, "My husband and I love the work that you and Cilista do. We support filmmakers. How much do you need?" And we gave them the budget that didn't include international distribution, because music rights are what's so expensive for these films. So we gave them a budget that was based upon PBS national distribution. So all of that was done. The film people have really loved it. And we are getting requests in from Europe. How can we see this film in Europe? And that was one of the phone calls we had with a good friend in Berlin. We're trying to raise the money to pay for the music rights so that the Irma film can be distributed in Europe. People are asking for it. Irma is loved internationally. But it's the struggles, and I'm sure your podcast, you've interviewed other filmmakers. Paying for these things, music rights, is always extremely difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy.
No, it's not. No, it's not. But there's momentum behind the Irma project that we're hoping, if we just keep on knocking on doors, some company will step up. I mean, it's a perfect film for a company to have their name presented by. She's an iconic figure in American music history. So
I know I caught it just on my local PBS station, right? Airing. They promoted it, and we were excited to catch it, and we saw it there. Do you know if it's on like PBS's like streaming platform?
No, I just had that.
I don't know either.
I just had that conversation. What the issue is, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting negotiated a deal with ASCAP and BMI for the music licenses to be covered by this blanket license. And so for the Irma project, it covers all PBS stations and affiliated stations, and they can stream it live on the day that they broadcast it live.
Oh.
And we gave them 3 years unlimited airing. The film was picked up by 90% of all PBS stations coast to coast. But to stream it via, I think it's called Passport.
Yeah.
That requires additional music clearances.
I gotcha.
And that's unfortunate, because that's what's holding it back from the Passport. American Public Television, who were wonderful to work with, they were really hoping they could put it on Passport, allow it to pass the Passport audience. And it's just a little confusing.
Yeah.
We've had people inquire. Rachel and I just talked about it 2 days ago. I'm hoping something can be done with Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the ASCAP BMI folks to allow it, because it's another film that has a lot of educational value.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the issue there, unfortunately.
Understood. So thinking back on your long career in making films about music, can you share with us some of the fond memories you have?
I'll let her go. I'll tell you mine after, but I want her to talk a little bit.
Fond memories. Each project was so different. There are interviews that we've done where I just learned something I never knew, or there was, it's hard for me to answer that question because it is such a long career. I will tell you a funny story is that I'm the person who had to deal with money on Make It Funky. And we were lucky enough through a connection of Michael's to get Keith Richards to come in, and he came in for no fee. We needed to fly him down and back and then fulfill his rider. Well, as people may know, riders for musicians can be everything from water to this huge number of things. We were all really nervous and all that. And finally the contract came through and I'm reading through it and I get to the rider and this was the rider. Orange Fanta, a bottle of vodka, a turkey sandwich on white bread, no mayonnaise. That was it. So, I was like, okay, we can do that. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
I think my other fondest memory isn't even of making the film. It was Make It Funky showed at a festival in California in the wine country. And we invited, well, the festival invited a couple of bands up from New Orleans, and it was the first time they had seen each other. And we showed the film. They played first, then they showed the film. At the end of the film, we looked around and all the musicians were in tears.
Yeah.
They were coming up and hugging Michael and saying, thank you so much for doing this. We don't know if we'll be able to go back and have the city be the city that we know and we love. Now, that has happened, but at the time, it wasn't. And when you make a film and it has that kind of impact on people, it's all worth it. You know, that's sort of the point. Your turn.
I'll tell you a couple that stick out, and there's so many fond memories. You know, she's right. There's been a lot. So this was a funny one. So your battery's okay?
Yeah.
So I had wanted to, Solomon Burke, who I absolutely adore. Solomon Burke's voice was so powerful. I used to listen to Solomon Burke quite a bit. Anyway, he was coming to Jazz Fest and I wanted to film him and interview him. And his manager said, well, we'll meet you backstage. You know, you come backstage, we'll send somebody to come get you in your trailer and you come over. Solomon wants to talk to you first. I said, okay. And, you know, I'm sure you guys and your audience, Solomon was a very big man, really big man. So I walk in this trailer and Solomon's sitting against the trailer and he's sitting in this chair and he has another chair that's in the corner. And he says, come here and sit down and talk to me. I said, okay. So I go over and he does this and he starts leaning into me and he's gigantic, man. And he was leaning in, he says, now you tell me why you want to interview Mr. Solomon Burke. And he was, and I mean, I was just getting crushed. I was going, what? Because I love your music, Solomon. So, and we wound up becoming friends after that. He asked me, it was, that one is like really struck me. One of my early, which led to an interview, was I wanted to do the Neville Brothers for NHK. This would have been probably 1990, probably the first year. And everything had to run through Art Neville. And if you ever talk to Art Neville, he was a wonderful, dear man. We lost a treasure with him. My phone rang one day And, you know, Art's voice, you recognize Art's voice right away. And he said, you want to interview the brothers, you want to shoot the brothers, you got to meet. I said, okay. So he gave me an address to meet him in it was a very difficult area of New Orleans. I will just say that. And I had to meet him, I think it was at midnight in the very back end of a parking lot of a theater that would be closed. So there was nothing around, pitch dark. And he just said, park your car at the very back of the parking lot. I was scared to death. I was like, oh God, can I do this? You know, I thought I was gonna wet my pants. So I was sitting back in my car in the back of the parking lot, and you know, 12 o'clock comes by, and then it gets to be about 12:15, and I see these headlights pull up, and I'm just sitting in the car going, oh God, I hope this is odd. I can't get out. I see the doors open. I see Art get out with this other big guy get out, and I got out of the car, and Art walks up to me, and he's standing maybe 3 feet away from me, and he's going, so you wanna film my family performance at Jazz Fest? You wanna? And I said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And he just looked at me, and he said, I'm gonna ask you one question. Can I trust you? And he said, you know, musicians get ripped off all the time. And I said, you can trust me. And he looked at me and he stuck his hand out.
He did say, make sure you don't ever mess with us.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I guess fond memories. The working in this business and doing what we've done has allowed us to forge really great relationships with a lot of musicians. One of them that comes to mind right now is Bonnie Raitt. We've worked with Bonnie quite a bit, and Bonnie is just absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And over the years, we've developed this friendship, and we're going to be seeing her again. She's playing at St. Michel Winery in August, mid-August this year. And we exchanged emails with the manager, and we're going to be invited to go see Bonnie. It's those sort of relationships that are wonderful. The relationship with Terrence Blanchard is wonderful. There's a musician with Preservation Hall. He's also independent, his own band. Greg Stafford, that's wonderful. So, you know, it's a, you know, if your audience has any young filmmakers, you know, it's a business, it's a career that has highs and lows financially. You've got to really work hard, but there's so much spiritually that it does for you. It makes life really worth living. It makes life fun. I mean, music speaks to the world. I mean, here's a perfect example. The fellow in Berlin that we've mentioned a couple of times that we just got finished talking to, I've known him for 20-25 years. We started meeting in France at Cannes for Meetum and MIPCOM and all those things. Just when we finished Irma, and I had promised Cilista, okay, we're going to take a break. He called and he said, I need your help. He was so incensed of Russia invading Ukraine, and he had a lot of friends and colleagues who were in Ukraine, that he was desperately trying to help them get out. All of them were women, mothers with children, and you know, he was desperate. He wanted us to help do a music project to bring awareness to what was happening, but more importantly, to help raise funds for humanitarian aid for all of Ukraine. So we said yes, whatever we want to do. And what started out as one song that he recorded from a folk group out of Republic of Georgia, it grew into musicians from all over the world joining this project. And then we were asked to make videos for these things. So and everybody was volunteering. We were volunteering, musicians were volunteering. We had an LA fantastic engineer in Los Angeles, Gustavo Borner, who's won like 24 Grammys. He came on board. Misha at Esplanade Studios came on board. And now there's versions in German, there's Italian, there's Spanish, there's Ukrainian, there's English versions, there's a Ukrainian version with some music provided by what's the group out of the Klezmer All Stars in.
Oh, cool.
So, I mean, it was a way for everybody to come together and let music speak to the world. Music speaks to everybody, and do something about this horrible situation that's going on in Ukraine.
Where can we find that music?
Cilista will have to send you we'll send you a link. We'll send you guys a link to the website. It's a wonderful project.
Okay, we'll post that in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I think everyone will enjoy checking that out. So you guys actually don't take breaks.
No, we don't. We don't. We take mini breaks.
I feel like several times it's been, oh, we thought about taking a break. And then this came up. So what else is next for you all?
We threw Up from the Streets. We had been developing a documentary on the life and career of Terrence Blanchard.
Right.
And Terrence and Robin were on board. COVID hit, everything had to be postponed. And now that Terrence is getting this huge worldwide acclaim because of being the first Black composer to have an opera in the history of the Met, and now they're going to do another opera with him. And Terrence, his own music and his own legacy has grown so much. So we're developing that project right now. And then there was one that we're really pretty excited about. And you're right, because when are we going to stop working? She's been telling me this since we were sitting here. While we were in New Orleans for Jazz Fest, we got approached by another good friend who owns a restaurant. And he asked us to co-develop a television series or a web-based series that's a combination of musicians and food.
That's all we'll say about it.
That's all we can say. So we have that going on. And then if I don't stop working, I think this lady's going to say, you know what, I've had it with you. I'm going to go find somebody else. So anyway.
This has been so great. Thank you for joining us, and thank you both for your contributions to the New Orleans music community.
Yeah.
Really, really wonderful stuff.
Well,
Do
thank
we have
you.
1 minute?
Of course.
The one thing I wanted to say, because originally this was sort of about Jazz Fest, and I was going to say, as a female in this business, I've been working since '81. It's mostly a male-centric industry. Michael, however, has always hired more women than men, which I always found interesting. And when you work shooting concerts, whether it's a festival or at a hall, especially a union hall in New York, you are working with men. And it gets stressful. That's all I'm going to say. It gets stressful. The one thing about the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival is that there is an amazing array of women who work at that festival, which make it a joy for me, because there are people like me who were there, and they deserve a real shout out. So that's just my little addendum.
And one more shout out too. Chris, I've heard great things about what you're doing for years, and I really don't know enough about what you're doing. I can't say enough about the good things I constantly hear. I've heard fabulous things about you and Nicole in this podcast, and you deserve the spotlight. And I don't know if you've ever been interviewed for your own podcast to talk about what you've done, but maybe Nicole can do that, because people need to know what you're doing.
What Threadhead does, yeah. In
Yeah, with
addition to
Threadhead.
your book, in addition to the other things you do.
Nicole keeps threatening to interview me, but I'm
No,
holding out.
no.
I'm holding out for more money until.
There you go.
I have an idea. It's a running gag right now that if we're ever stood up for an interview, which has happened before, that I'll interview Chris, because that's how he ended up interviewing me, because we stood up and we were both sitting there. All right, well, Chris asked me some questions. So I'm going to do that if we're ever stood up. But I have a new idea. I think we could use it as a fundraiser for everything that needs funds. Because everybody keeps asking me, when are you going to interview Chris Joseph? He's so interesting and fascinating. So
Okay, so here's an idea that you got to do then. I mean, you guys are obviously work together fantastic, and you guys trust each other. So just tell Chris you're all excited about this interview you got lined up. Just get a fake name.
Just lie to him.
Just lie to him. And just say, "Oh
you
my
remember,
God,
you remember I'm here. I can hear all this.
He didn't show up. He didn't show up. And
Well, you're
then-
right. You could do a GoFundMe of, do you want to hear an interview with Chris Joseph?
There
Please
you go.
contribute, and then you could fund your series and you'd be all set.
This was especially fun for me because I love it when we gang up on Chris. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Cilista and Michael, this was an honor and a real treat. I could keep talking for another hour, but Chris will pull me off the
With the hook, yeah.
Internet.
Have fun editing this one.
Thank you guys so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Take
Yeah,
care.
see ya.